A fierce beast once asked a brave warrior, who possessed neither sharp molars nor strong claws, what weapon he had. The beast replied that he had blood and sweat, flesh and bones. He swallowed the corpses of his enemies and used them as his weapon. The brave warrior then told the beast that he would kill him and devour him. Beasts with magical energy and abilities are called mystical creatures. A small number of mystical creatures were granted human forms by the gods, and they were incarnate, serving as prophets for the benefit of humans. However, there was also an evil incarnation of that power, which the people then referred to as the demon god. The man was running speedily in the forest while begging someone to help him. Someone was pointing a loaded crossbow at the man and released the arrow, hitting the man in the back while shouting excitedly that it was a bullseye. The man told the bald guy that it was better than he thought, and the bald guy replied that much is a piece of cake. Then the bald guy ordered the other men to take everything that was worth money and return alive before sunset. The man also told them that it was just a feeling, but the forest felt especially eerie today, and there might be a monster in the forest staring at them from somewhere. Then, one of the men was surprised to see something and pointed to a lot of animal corpses on the side. The man asks the other man if there was a territorial dispute between the wolves, and the man replies that he is not sure, but it looks like a one-sided massacre. Suddenly, the bald guy called one of the men, Martin, to come and check it out. Then, Martin saw that behind the man was the corpse of a mystical creature. Martin bent down to look at the man, thinking that he looks like the leader of that wolf pack. One of the men asks if the man could have killed the mystical being. But Martin tells the man that it's a bunch of nonsense. He tries to touch the man on the ground while saying, "Who cares how this wandering fellow croaked?" He tells everyone that they should see if the man has anything useful. However, Martin is shocked to feel something and sees that a lizard is biting his leg, making him ask, "What's up with that daft-looking lizard?" Martin shook his foot to make the lizard go away, but it was biting him hard. The bald guy told Martin to stay calm and swing his knife to slice the lizard into two. However, the bald guy was surprised and shouted in pain because his hand got cut off first by the man. The man punched the bald guy in the face, and the bald guy's face bled, causing the other men to panic. Our protagonist sternly warned them not to touch that guy without his permission, or he would kill them. One of the men shouted that our protagonist was picking a fight, and the others were left wondering what was going on. The bearded man shouted to them that our protagonist was the one who had killed Hans, the bald guy, but our protagonist insisted that they could see Hans was still alive. Martin asked him if he thought he could get away with something like that and ordered everyone to surround him. Our protagonist drew his axe, calling them fools, and warned them that if they had someone who would mourn their passing after they were gone, they should withdraw now. He also warned that if they harmed anything other than a beast, their dreams would turn violent. The men ran toward him to attack, but he just stared at them and swiftly and easily slashed the men in front of him with his axe. The men collapsed on the ground in pain simultaneously, and the bearded man, who was in the back, shook in fear while shouting that he was like a monster. Martin grabbed his crossbow and pointed it at him from behind, with other men joining, which surprised our protagonist. Martin ordered the others to shoot, and they all released their arrows toward him. He grabbed his lizard, which was on his shoulder, and shielded it with his arm while being hit by arrows. One of the men asked in a loud voice if they had finished him off, but Martin told everyone to hold on in shock. They all witnessed a red flame crawling out of his arm and his body, with different beasts emerging from the flame. Then, a huge beast came out of the red flame, making them tremble in fear, and they shouted that he was a demon god. His eyes turned red, but then he returned to his normal self, and the red flame showing the beast slowly faded away. He felt pain all over his body without noticing someone in the tree watching him. A moment later, in the village, the man couldn't believe what he was seeing while looking at the huge wolf in front of him. He asked if all of it was done by that man alone, pointing at our protagonist who was tied up on a pole with his lizard inside a cage. He told the man that it would be better for them to burn and get rid of that thing right away, but Martin told him that it wouldn't be enough to tear him to death. The man asked him what his name was, and he replied that his name is Ananta. The man asked him about his purpose in doing this, and he replied that he is hungry, which left the man confused. However, Martin told the man that it's not worth listening to Ananta, and they all saw clearly with their own eyes that Ananta turned into a gigantic monster all of a sudden. Then Martin asked the man if there weren't widespread rumors going around Sankey recently, a story about a demon god who eats corpses roaming around the region. The man told Martin that, no matter how they look at it, Ananta is a human. Still, Martin pointed to the dead wolf and told the man that he was talking about the scars on the body of the mystical creature that Ananta was with, then asked if there weren't definitely traces of being eaten, which means Ananta is definitely a demon god in human skin. Ananta laughed, making Martin angrily ask him what's so funny, and he replied that if what he says is true, an evil god who even eats mythical creatures. He asked them if they will feel at ease with him only being bound by chains. Suddenly, the wolf moved while he was telling them that they don't know anything, including what a monster eats. Then blood dripped on the man's shoulder, and when he looked up, he was shocked to see the wolf, which was a corpse, come back to life again. He told them that it was no ordinary corpse, it was a creature whose existence had been reduced to being the hands and feet of a demon god called a hideous monster. Then someone shouted emergency continuously because the demon god was attacking them, and a swarm of monsters were running toward their village together with the demon god. The demon god walked forward and ordered the monsters to climb up, which they did, making the watcher of the village shout that they are coming over. The people inside were being eaten alive by the monsters, but then the torch fell on the village wood gate, causing a fire that burned the monsters together with the village. The fire spread while the demon god was walking forward, but it spread faster, burning even the monsters who were climbing up, making the demon god stop walking forward. Suddenly, something flew out of the village, and the head of the mystical wolf landed in front of the demon god, who looked up in confusion and saw a huge monster coming out of the village, telling the demon god that thirst and hunger gather together and burst forth. Blood and sweat, flesh and bones, and he'll completely eat him up. He walks toward the burning village and approaches the demon god, telling him that he will distort him to make him look like prey on the verge of death. The demon god stepped on the head of the wolf in front of him and screamed loudly in anger. The monster appeared behind the demon god and ran toward Ananta to attack, but he easily grabbed the monster's head and slammed it to the ground. He then bent down and jumped to slash the monster that was attacking him with his sharp claws. The demon god observed Ananta attacking his monster, and the demon lord activated his phantom skill. It growled loudly and slowly transformed into a phantom, then jumped forward to meet him, causing a loud explosion. Blood splattered everywhere, and they both attacked each other using their sharp claws. He continuously slashed the demon lord, but the demon lord hit his chest hard, causing him to bleed profusely. However, he grabbed the demon lord's arm, surprising the demon lord. He launched his fist and punched the demon lord in the face, sending it flying away and leaving its arm cut off by him. He slowly returned to his human form and looked at the demon lord, who had a hole in his chest. He walked closer to it, looked at the lady inside it, and removed her from the demon lord. He gazed at the lady in confusion and wondered if she had been unconscious from the beginning. Suddenly, something flew toward him from behind, startling him. It swiftly attacked him before he could dodge it, and an eagle turned around in the air to face him and landed on the ground. He acknowledged that indeed, it was the real demon god who ate the corpses. The eagle slowly transformed, becoming a man. The demon god told him that it was impossible, and he never thought even his precious puppet would be brought down. The man also told him that he had been watching him ever since he set foot on that land and asked for his reasons. Suddenly, he threw the lady at the man and mentioned that he almost fell asleep while he was mumbling. Then he told the man that he was not interested in hearing a beast's soliloquy or whatever and challenged him, saying he would kill him. The man slowly transformed back into an eagle while explaining that his power allowed him to control the spirits of the dead. He added that if he killed him and took him under his control, he would have a puppet bigger and stronger than a deer or anything like it. Then he ordered the dead to become a phantom, and the dead monster released a purple light, causing the people who were dead to rise up again. The demon god called him an unknown being and told him to be crushed and swallowed by that barricade of bloody corpses. Then a monster bit his leg, and someone stabbed his chest, causing his blood to splatter everywhere. The undead were attacking him at the same time. The demon god launched its sharp eagle claws while asking him if he didn't have any power left to squeeze out anymore. Then the demon god pierced its sharp claws into his chest and teasingly told him that he should hear his mourning cry before death. However, he just looked up at the demon god and smiled. Then he released a powerful red flame, burning the undead to death again. The demon god was shocked and couldn't believe what he was seeing while looking at him releasing a huge beast with flame. He teasingly told the demon god to let him hear him howl like a beast. Then the huge monster behind him opened its mouth and bit the eagle's upper body, making it scream in pain. But then, he saw the other monsters reaching toward him and they grabbed him, pulling him down until he became a flame, just like them. A moment later, the lady inside the fake demon god opened her eyes and sat up, shaking in pain. She was shocked to witness Ananta releasing a powerful flame behind him. She was stunned while watching Ananta's flame slowly fade away. Then he looked at her, making her sweat and gulp in fear. He slowly walked closer to her and stopped in front of her. He told her that she was free from the demon god's control, which made her head hurt as she remembered something. She told him that, at that time, she walked toward the shining wings, making him surprised, and asked if she was a victim of the wings too. She asked him what he meant by a victim of the wings and who he was. He replied that he is Ananta, a descendant of the black dragon and a survivor. He also told her that he is devouring all the demon gods in the world and the one who will kill the incarnation of the wings. She replied that she really had no idea what he was talking about, even if it was a black dragon or an incarnation of wings. When she was about to say something about the meaning of both, she snapped and collapsed. The lizard told him something, and he told it that it really does all sorts of things. Then he stared at her. On the other hand, in her dream, she was running swiftly without stopping. But then, a skull appeared behind her, making her look back and see the huge deer chasing after her. She ran even faster, but then she tripped on something in the wet ground and fell face first. When she looked up, she was shocked to see the deer's reflection in the blood on the ground, looking back at her. When she looked up again, she saw a swarm of dead people lying in a river of their own blood. She looked at her hand in panic and screamed. Then, shining wings appeared behind her and she looked back to see it. She saw a man smiling at her. Suddenly, she woke up and a lady greeted her excitedly. The little lady told her that she seemed to be very distressed while she was asleep and asked her if she had a nightmare. But then Ananta called his lizard Ruby and told it that they should start. Ruby gathered its flame in its mouth and released it forward, burning the dead animals and the people. The monster stood up but was burned by Ruby's flame shortly, while Ananta just quietly looked at them burning. The little lady told the lady that all the monsters that were being controlled by demon gods were dealt with in that way. Then the little lady walked closer to Ananta and told him that he did a great job on that one too. But then he hit her on the head and told her to shut up because she was a garbage information dealer. He also told the little lady that because of her crappy information, he had more trouble that time too, while pointing at the lady. Then he hit her head once again, shouting at her that he had done his part, so she should give him his pay. The little lady stood up, telling him that he was still as impatient as ever, and then she asked the lady for her name, if she didn't mind. The lady replied that her name was Nadia. She told Nadia that she didn't know there would be another victim of the wings like Ananta, making Nadia confused. Ananta angrily called the little lady, and the lady smiled, telling him that he was quite impatient. Then she clicked the compass she was holding, and the ground they were standing on became a huge hole. They all fell, making Nadia scream in shock, but Ananta and the little girl remained calm. Nadia closed her eyes in fear, but when she felt she was not landing, she opened her eyes to peek and was surprised to see a huge tree and a town in front of her. She asked where on earth they were. The little lady told her that they say a clever rabbit digs 3 holes and it seems her introduction is a bit late. Then the little lady introduced herself as a member of Rabbit's Foot, the continent's largest information network, and she was their cute information dealer, Whitefoot. Whitefoot introduced Ananta, with whom she can say she has a long-standing partnership, and explained that they were at Caves, the largest trading city in the south. The huge tree she saw in front of her was a sacred tree called the White Lotus Tree. She also told her that at the top of the tree was the location. But then Nadia shouted that it was enough before Whitefoot could finish her words. Nadia told them that she was grateful that they saved her from being controlled by a demon god. However, she was not willing to listen to their one-sided stories any longer. If they wanted to continue the conversation, they should start by answering her questions. She asked them for what purpose they brought her to that mysterious city, but Ananta told her to shut up and follow him because he'd show her why she was brought there. While they were walking, Nadia asked him what the incarnation of wings that they were searching for looked like, and he angrily replied that the wings man thought he was a god, but the truth is that the wings man was a nauseating beast. Nadia asked what it was, and Whitefoot replied that just as they, incarnations, were given a human form and powers, the incarnation of wings could also bestow great power on others, but she didn't know if it was a blessing or a curse to have an incomplete power. She asked Whitefoot what she meant by an incomplete power, but Ananta just told them that they have arrived, and Nadia was surprised to see a lot of people in chains. The prisoners included a girl, a man, and even a little child. Whitefoot welcomed her to the slave market of Caves and told her that, for some reason, the slave market in Caves had recently been growing rapidly because foreigners, wanderers, and vagabonds had been captured by slave hunters, and even mystical creatures were captured. They walked inside the room, and Nadia asked them what this kind of place had to do with the incarnation of wings. But then someone kicked her from the side, making her roll down the basement stairs. She slowly stood up but was surprised to hear something behind her and shocked to see a lot of people tied up. She looked at the man and the shaking woman, then asked what those people were, and Ananta replied that they were sacrifices. Ananta explained to her that they are living sacrifices to be offered to the incarnation of wings, and they are victims who will be sacrificed at the top of the sacred tree. He slammed the gate shut, telling her that she was like them. So to hunt down the incarnation of wings, there needs to be bait. Ananta told Whitefoot that the rest was up to her, to which she agreed. On the other hand, Nadia rushed up the stairs and shouted for them to wait. She asked Ananta if the people there were all his doing, but he just asked her back what she was going to do about it. She furiously shouted at him to stop messing around and told him that he was using weak and innocent people as a means to achieve his goals. Then she asked him if he didn't feel any guilt at all, but he just turned around to continue walking and told her that she can't exact revenge without getting her hands dirty. She shook in anger while saying that she couldn't accept it, but then Whitefoot told her that it was understandable and asked what terrible things those poor humans suffered at the hands of the incarnation of wings. Whitefoot also told her that just imagining it brought tears to her eyes, making her angrier, and told Whitefoot that she was despicable. She told Whitefoot not to think she could just take advantage of her as she pleased. But Whitefoot just laughed at her and told her that it was exactly as Ananta said. Until now, she was controlled by a demon god and massacred a lot of people. Then Whitefoot told her that she wouldn't care about a few dozen lives, and even if it wasn't her intention, it doesn't mean those things never happened. She tried to reason, but seeing her expression, Whitefoot smiled and told her that her anger shouldn't be directed at her and Ananta because their common enemy is the evil incarnation of Wings. A moment later, in the castle near the tree, Ananta was sitting inside and checking his armor. Then Whitefoot appeared and told him that she thought he said something pointless, and those sacrifices had nothing to do with him. But he just asked Whitefoot what happened with Nadia. She replied that she had asked Nadia for her cooperation, and as they planned, they were headed to the White Lotus Temple with the Wing Guardians. She also told him that the offering of a sacrifice was the starting point for them to encounter the incarnation of Wings, and with it, they have completed all preparations to hunt down the incarnation of Wings. A helper in the White Lotus Temple, which would have been impossible to invade due to the barrier, was arranged. Participation in the arena, which requires living sacrifices, has also been resolved. So, if he can get his hands on a branch of the lotus tree, which is awarded to the winner of the arena, it won't be long before he meets the incarnation of Wings. But Whitefoot knows that the process is so tedious to begin with. If only Ananta had made up his mind from the beginning, it would have been easier to draw the enemy's attention with an indiscriminate massacre. But she knows that there is a line that should never be crossed and wonders if Ananta is trying to draw a line between the realms of man and beast. She nodded her head, thinking that there were a number of means and methods, and it was contradictory. He told her that he could hear her rolling her eyes from there, and that it hadn't been long since their last meal, so he thought it was good enough for a post-meal workout. Then he started to walk away, telling her to sit quietly and watch from the sidelines because it was the way he hunted beasts. She was confused to hear it and begged him not to do anything that would attract attention. Then she told him that if he did, he wouldn't know what might go wrong, but he just told her that he'd consider it. Meanwhile, in the arena, the man shouted to his men to use a shield wall, and the men began to shield themselves and forward their spears to the huge beast in front of them. It growled furiously at them, but the leader told his men not to be afraid and stay in formation. Then someone grabbed one of the men's shoulders, and Ananta threw the man in the back, making the men ask him what the hell he was doing. But he just told them that it was annoying and called them assholes. The beast growled at him and raised its claw to attack him, but he just easily cut its arm with his axe, making the leader of the men shocked, and Whitefoot couldn't believe it, thinking that Ananta was such trouble. The leader wondered how it was possible and how an ordinary human could overpower a mystical beast. He glared at the beast, jumped toward it, launched his axe at the top of it, and attacked its head with his axe, making it fall to the ground. The audience was also stunned to see it. He pulled his axe out of the beast's head and screamed loudly in victory. Then he looked at his side, telling Wings Man to just wait because he'll slice him and eat him alive soon. Meanwhile, in the White Lotus Temple, the sacrifices entered, and the door behind them shut closed. Nadia looked around and saw a large tree in front of them. Suddenly, a man called them fearful citizens, making her angrily stare at the man. But the man just let the bird on his hand and told them to let go of their fear because they welcomed them to the temple of the goddess. She wondered if that man was the incarnation of Wings. The White Lotus tree, surrounded by a strong barrier, was also known as the Tree of Sanctuary. Its intentions were unknown, but the incarnation of Wings nested there and began accepting live sacrifices. Those who provided live sacrifices were given the privilege to compete in the arena of capes. Warriors who survived the battles with spiritual beasts and proved themselves worthy were awarded the brand of the White Lotus tree. Those who proved themselves worthy of the incarnation of Wings received immense power, and appointed themselves as the guardians of the wing. Before Nadia was dragged into the White Lotus Temple, Whitefoot told her that to go through their defense, they planned to sneak her in by disguising her identity as a live sacrifice, and it was the gist of the plan. Then Whitefoot asked her if she had any questions, and she asked her why Ananta wanted to kill that incarnation of the wing and if it was related to the power Ananta possessed. Whitefoot replied that she couldn't tell her the details. However, one thing she can tell her is if an incarnation of revenge exists, she can't imagine it being anyone but him. The wing called them his subjects who had gone through hardships and ordered them to raise their heads and witness him, making the people shake in fear, wondering if he was the wing and praying to their lord in fear. The wing introduced himself as the saint who is admired by all and told them that as the owner of that White Lotus tree, and the incarnation of Wings that brings sweet dew to that world of darkness, he was Balzac. Balzac also told them that his life sacrifices who shall be pitied and ordered them to quietly finish their preparations for liberation and leave their bodies to the wing of salvation. Suddenly, the lady shouted, calling Balzac the incarnation of Wings, and begged him to have mercy on them, sisters who are innocent. She begged him to at least save her sister. He raised his hand, calling the lady his beautiful subject, and told her that he shall reward her for her kind thoughts, making the lady light up. But before she could finish thanking him, he made the lady's head explode. making the little girl shocked to see her big sister die next to her. The people who saw it shook in fear, but Nadia was furious. He told them that everyone is equal in the face of death and told the little girl that her sister was just now liberated from fear and remorse, but they would be united again in nirvana very soon. On the other hand, the guard noticed Nadia walking toward him, so he slowly pulled his sword from behind. Then, a black light emanated from her, and the guard saw the skeleton deer in front of him, which attacked the guards nearby. She told Balzac that he was no savior because he was just a cold-blooded murderer. Balzac just smiled, saying that he didn't expect there would be an incarnation among the live sacrifices. She slowly released her power, but then she felt the people behind her and saw that they were shaking in fear, calling her a monster. She saw the deer shadow in front of her and remembered Whitefoot telling her that no matter if it was intended or not, she couldn't take back what had already happened. Then someone told her not to lose, and when she looked back, she saw an expressionless child holding the little lady. She was stunned at first but smiled, understanding it, while slowly gaining control of her power. Then she released roots from underground, and the roots grabbed the guards. She made a shield using her roots to protect everyone. She grabbed a nearby root, telling everyone not to worry because she would protect them. Suddenly, she was surprised to see something, and a powerful light attacked her. Balzac told her that she spouted empty promises and called her a female deer. He also told her that she was a nameless incarnation and asked her if she dared to go against the renowned him. She replied that she did have a name, and her name was Nadia, the incarnation of nature. Balzac just laughed and called her an insolent bitch. She released more roots from underground, wondering if it was an invisible shockwave or telekinesis because she had unconsciously been blocking the attacks, but they were not very threatening. Then she made a huge hammer using her roots, thinking that she'd crush Balzac with greater power. She released it toward him, but he just smiled and showed his powerful wings, ordering them to rip the hammer to shreds. This caused a loud sound that could be heard in the arena, grabbing Ananta's attention. The audience also heard it and asked if the sound came from the White Lotus tree, making them wonder what happened, but he just silently looked at the White Lotus tree. On the other hand, inside the White Lotus temple, Nadia was stunned to see her hammer, called Susalis, the skill known for its intensity, being ripped in just one move. She noticed that it was on a completely different level from the attacks before. Suddenly, a huge cage appeared above them, and Balzac was asking her if it was the end of her shabby moves. Then he snapped his fingers, and the cage landed in front of her. She looked at it, wondering what it was, and she was surprised to see a huge monster in front of her. The child shouted for her to be careful, but it was too late when she felt something and saw a huge wooden spike pierce her side. He was smiling and said to witness and introduce the monster on his back, full of skulls and human skin, with the body of a weird bird as his faithful servant. Meanwhile, in the arena, Ananta killed many beasts. He then turned his gaze to the wounded tiger, which softly growled at him, silencing him. Ananta conveyed to the tiger that it had every right to resent him. Raising his axe, he told the tiger that in the face of death, it should not avert its gaze, and with a swift stroke, he decapitated it. In the background, one of the men approached the leader named Bernhard, reporting that everyone was perplexed by the unexpected turn of events. It was evident that Ananta would emerge victorious, but it should have unfolded according to the original plan. As they watched Ananta, covered in blood, someone shouted that the arena's winner had finally been determined. The man inquired of Bernhard about their next steps. The host announced that the Winged Guardians would present the glorious winner with a branch from the White Lotus tree as the guards of the White Lotus entered the arena. Bernhard assured the man that the plan had proceeded as intended, and no matter what had occurred, they would obtain a White Lotus flower branch at any cost. Ananta peered down at the object the guard held, and the guard opened the case to reveal a shining branch. Ananta immediately seized it and stared at it. Meanwhile, inside the White Lotus temple, the children observed Nadia from within the shield she had created. She knelt on the ground, bleeding, while the monster glared at her. Balzac reminded her that she had vowed to protect those sacrifices at all costs, akin to a tear of winter. He urged her to glance at the frightened faces of those people and to expedite their rescue from fear. He mentioned that it might be Yo's mercy but was met with Nadia's frustration, urging him not to make her repeat herself, declaring herself neither a savior nor anything, but a terrible demon lord who spread death through fear. Silently, Balzac requested her permission to demonstrate that true salvation commences with delivering despair. Suddenly, new roots sprouted from beneath the people's shield, piercing them one by one, much to Nadia's astonishment. She shouted at Balzac not to do it as she witnessed the people dying before her eyes. The roots also emerged near the monster, piercing it, causing it to collapse. Balzac exclaimed to bestow the blessing of the wings of salvation upon that servant, and told Nadia she would be honored. The roots that had pierced the people lit up, their energy flowing into their veins, leaving Nadia in awe. As the energy traveled towards the monster, Nadia pondered if there was something within the branch of the White Lotus. She observed the light taking on a human face. Balzac explained to her that they were in a hellish field where life and death coexisted. Unlike Nawa, who was immortal, every human being would eventually die, and he could give meaning to their otherwise worthless lives. He instructed her to look while he extracted the life from the guard, explaining that the man's insignificant life was nourishing the white lotus tree, creating an immortal warrior. He said that in the cycle of life, they would be reborn as a light that would protect the white lotus tree, and it was the blessing of the wings. Nadia asked him who he was and how many people's lives he consumed. In response, he raised his finger and a root grabbed Nadia. He admitted that he had consumed so many lives that counting them was meaningless and called her an endlessly arrogant woman. He teasingly asked if she had any last words. Despite her pain, she managed to tell him to go to hell, making him smile and dismiss it as a trivial end. As he was about to kill her, the temple door suddenly swung open, and something flew toward him. Balzac managed to dodge it, but it ended up slicing the guard's head in half. Suddenly, Ananta appeared, launching the sharp branch that left Balzac stunned and shocked as it struck him in the eye. Ananta then jumped behind Balzac, and Nadia called out to him. Ananta couldn't believe that she was still alive and expressed his surprise. The branch in Balzac's eye slowly shrank, revealing that it was a white lotus tree branch. Ananta asked if he was the winner of the arena and mentioned that he never thought someone would make it to that point. However, he simply called Balzac a bastard and inquired why Nadia was associating with such a lousy person. Nadia asked Ananta what the wings of incarnation were, and he replied that it was insufficient to enter the territory of Yo without his permission. This angered Balzac, who insulted the great Yo, the incarnation of wings, and began to slowly transform, threatening to pluck out Ananta's disrespectful tongue himself. Just as he was about to say something, he called them both, slowly transforming as he informed them that it wasn't the wing of incarnation. Meanwhile, in the arena, one of the guards attacked someone but was swiftly defeated by Bernhard. Bernhard stood up and ordered his men to eliminate all the guards, and a fight ensued. Bernhard had been waiting to welcome the winner after the results were announced, but there was no sign of the winner who would claim the white lotus tree branch. This made him wonder if it might be some kind of trap. As he entered the white lotus gate, he was surprised to find dead guards on the stairs, making him ponder if Ananta was targeting the incarnation of wings. On the other hand, inside the temple, Nadia asked if it meant that Balzac was not the incarnation of wings, implying that he was a fake. He retorted by asking her if her eyes were merely decorative and why she believed the incarnation of wings was bestowed such a grand name, helping her grasp the idea. He further explained that the incarnation of wings symbolized 3 pairs of white wings. He teased Balzac, questioning how he could claim to be the great incarnation of wings when he didn't even possess a proper pair of wings. He suggested that if Balzac was going to impersonate someone, he should at least complete the look properly. Angrily, he told Balzac that he was only capable of talking nonsense. Balzac remained silent for a moment and dismissed it as nonsense not even worth responding to. He then ordered his guards to attack Ananta and eliminate him. Ananta transformed his hand into a sharp claw and cut the root that was holding Nadia, causing her to fall to the ground. He questioned why she was being so dense, but then she noticed the 2 kids on the root were still alive, and rushed towards them, while Ananta urged her to get out of there. The undead creature approached him to attack, and he swiftly decapitated it with his claw. However, the monster saw them and emitted a loud scream. It released something from its mouth to attack him, but fortunately, Nadia arrived in time and jumped to shield the 2 kids. As the fog gradually dissipated, his dragon hand was revealed tightly gripping the pole, and he had completely transformed into a dragon. He leaped toward the monster and extended his sharp claws to attack it, causing a loud explosion upon impact. However, when he jumped back, he observed that the monster didn't even flinch and retaliated furiously with its own claws. Fortunately, he evaded the attack by jumping in time, then launched himself at the monster once again with his flaming hand, striking it in the face, causing it to shatter into pieces. The monster's body slammed against the wall with force. However, he sensed someone approaching from behind and was forcefully slammed onto the ground. Balzac stepped on his chest while acknowledging that Ananta was strong enough to witness the goddess's full power. He released his wings once more and commanded them to turn Ananta into dust, leaving Nadia shocked as she remembered that it was these wings that had crushed her earlier attack. However, Ananta swiftly grabbed Balzac's feet and pulled him closer, intending to devour Balzac alive. Feathers from Balzac's wings fluttered into the air, but Balzac halted the attack with his feet, expressing his belief in Ananta's ignorance. Shakily, Ananta raised his claw and attempted to attack Balzac, but Balzac jumped in time to evade the attack. Ananta leaped furiously toward Balzac, launching a series of continuous attacks, but Balzac easily dodged each one. Balzac then leaped into a distance, and Ananta followed by jumping toward him. Balzac smiled and swiftly slashed Ananta's arm off using his sharp-clawed feet. The ground behind Ananta was also destroyed due to Balzac's attack. Ananta screamed in pain, but his arm began to regenerate slowly, leaving Balzac perplexed about how such rapid regeneration was possible. Ananta raised his newly formed claws and hurled them toward Balzac. Balzac attempted to block the attack with roots, but he did not anticipate that the claws would pass through the roots and slice them in half. Balzac cried out in pain and cursed in anger, while Nadia noticed that the attack had worked. Balzac was shaking on the ground, calling Ananta a lowly and insignificant creature and questioning how he dared to do this. Suddenly, he felt the monster regenerating behind him and swiftly avoided its attack. He glanced back and saw Balzac raising the top of the monster's head, taunting him about not fearing the gods. Ananta leaped once more towards Balzac to resume his attack, while Balzac vowed to make Ananta realize the insurmountable difference in class between them. Meanwhile, the bright sky outside began to crack, and the fracture spread across the heavens. A massive hand punched through the sky, shattering it into pieces. With enough space cleared, a man could be seen inside, with bright blue eyes and black skin. The man flew out of the fractured sky and gazed down at the earth below. Meanwhile, inside the White Lotus Temple, Balzac launched an attack on Ananta, telling him to behold his glorious wings. However, Balzac was taken aback when Ananta punched him, and his hand pierced through Balzac's stomach. Balzac retaliated using his monstrous body, causing Ananta to crash to the ground. Balzac raised his hand, and roots emerged beneath Ananta, seizing his feet. The monster then began releasing something from its mouth, revealing a multitude of sharp teeth. Balzac declared his intention to make mincemeat out of Ananta and attacked him with the swarm of sharp teeth. Ananta calmly observed the incoming attack, enduring the continuous hits, causing Nadia to worryingly call his name. However, he swiftly sprinted behind Balzac, surprising him as he launched his flaming fist and punched Balzac's body. He then rolled backward. Balzac cursed him and was further astonished to witness Ananta transforming into a sharper and stronger dragon form. Nadia noticed the change in his appearance. Ananta sliced through the roots holding his feet and leaped into the air to avoid the sharp teeth. Balzac realized that Ananta was faster than the eye could see and pondered whether Ananta's power included regeneration and body transformation. He decided to crush Ananta with overwhelming force, leaving him no chance to escape. The ground began to tremble intensely, causing them both to slam hard into the earth. Ananta was shocked by the rapidly shifting terrain, so he leaped higher to evade the grasping roots. The roots extended to attack him, but he deftly avoided each one. He glanced at Balzac, realizing that as long as Balzac possessed the White Lotus tree, he could recover repeatedly, and the longer Ananta waited, the more challenging the situation would become. He then looked up at the top of the tree and noticed people from outside falling onto the tree. Ananta ran closer to the tree, bent his legs, and leaped even higher, leaving Balzac and Nadia astonished. He launched his fist and punched the ceiling, causing it to explode and collapse as he descended. Suddenly, roots tightly gripped Ananta, and Balzac asked him if he genuinely desired to be crushed to death by the collapsing ceiling or if he had a foolish plan in mind. Ananta glanced at Balzac and inquired about the number of lives he had taken until now. Balzac admitted he had lost count, claiming he was sick of it. Ananta smiled upon hearing this and released his black skeleton wings, telling Balzac that he should be crushed under the weight of all the deaths he had caused. He then ordered the undead to transform into phantoms. Abruptly, a loud noise came from the destroyed ceiling, confusing Balzac, who looked up. Many undead creatures jumped through the hole towards Balzac, attempting to grab him, causing him to exclaim in confusion. He fought off the undead continuously with his claw, shouting for them to get away from him, but their numbers overwhelmed him. Nadia, observing the chaotic scene, wondered what was happening as she witnessed Balzac being devoured by the undead. More undead poured towards Balzac, and he screamed in pain. Despite the agony, he managed to move away and observe Nadia with the children on the roots, shouting that they were living sacrifices. As Balzac prepared to attack Nadia, the roof above them cracked, and a powerful light penetrated, flying towards Balzac. Nadia had to shield her eyes because the light was too intense. When she looked again, she saw a man standing on top of Balzac's head. The man and Nadia locked eyes for a moment. Suddenly, the man knelt on the ground, leaving her confused. He mentioned that he hoped his journey was pleasant. The child with an expressionless face behind her stood up, surprising her. The child slowly grew larger, and his hair became longer as he addressed the man as Bihiron, remarking that it had been a very rough welcome. The child's shirt fell into pieces as he transformed into a man. Bihiron informed the newly transformed individual that he had come to serve him and referred to the man as an incarnation of wings. Before that, Whitefoot began her routine report, stating that she had witnessed a rift in space in the sky above the White Lotus tree without a doubt. If the one who assists the wing has appeared, it means that right now, the incarnation of the wings is in the city. Back in the temple, the incarnation of the wings silently approached Bihiron and observed her. She felt a sudden pain in her heart, causing her to kneel in surprise and gaze at the man, wondering who he was. Balzac regained consciousness and, when he looked up, he was surprised to see the man. He referred to the man as Juho and questioned why he was there. Juho asked if Baltsek had forgotten him, and Baltsek replied by asking how he could ever forget the cold former owner of that loyal servant. Juho raised his finger while explaining that he had taken Baltsek's wings to punish him for being intoxicated with false glory. Behiron lifted Baltsek by his neck, and Juho reminded Baltsek that wings were originally created to be granted only to those worthy of taking to the skies. Baltsek retorted by saying that Juho was spouting meaningless words at him, someone who had sacrificed thousands and millions of lives to create the flesh of a monster just to regain his wings. Juho touched Baltsek's body, calling him foolish and utterly worthless. He then released a powerful light within Baltsek's body, causing him to scream in agony. In just a few seconds, Baltsek disintegrated into a bright dust. Meanwhile, amidst a pile of dead human bodies, Ananta hid in the center and observed everything from the shadows. He recalled Juho telling him about his dream to cross to another world and find the horizon leading to the land of the gods. Juho had vowed to never stop until he achieved that dream, even if it meant making enemies of everyone in the world. Ananta also remembered their village being burned down and people being burned to death. A lady had asked him to come back home safely, but upon his return, she discovered him and others burned to death, which left him filled with fury. Behiron told Juho that, in the end, the white lotus tree was just a symbolic name for a tree in the world of paradise, and it was unrelated to his wishes. Juho explained that, at most, it was a combination of the power of the branch with the sacred tree, and was an embarrassing fake compared to the world tree. More importantly, he turned his attention to Nadia, who was on the ground in pain, and noted that Behiron was forgetting that interesting connection while displaying his wings. Suddenly, Ananta's hand emerged from the pile of dead bodies, and he furiously glared at Juho. He released his powerful claws and hurled them at Juho, who was preoccupied with Nadia. Ananta's attack caused a loud explosion upon impact, but when the fog cleared, he saw Behiron had blocked it for Juho. Ananta was relieved to finally see Juho and screamed Juho's name. He sprinted towards Juho, but Behiron waited for him, and when he drew close, Behiron punched him in the face, causing it to explode into small pieces. Ananta regenerated quickly, and Behiron demanded that he reveal his name. Ananta growled in anger, refusing to respond, and Behiron realized that there was no need for words. They exchanged blows, with their fists colliding. Meanwhile, Juho was focused on Nadia, who was in pain. As he reached out to touch her, someone swung an axe and attempted to cut him in half, but he disappeared, leaving Bernhard to look back in surprise. Juho told Bernhard that he didn't even know when to give up and called him experienced Bernhard. Ananta and Behiron continued to exchange blows, blocking and dodging each other's attacks. Ananta tried to block Behiron's fist and looked back at Juho, swearing that he would rip apart anyone who got in his way. He thought about how he would tear Behiron apart and kill him while he slowly underwent another transformation. Behiron kicked Ananta away, and he was pushed back as he continued to change. His dragon head became larger and sharper, and his wings emerged behind him. He let out a loud scream, capturing everyone's attention, and they were astonished by his transformation. Juho calmly looked at him in his complete form and referred to him as the Black Dragon Azidahaka. On the other hand, Ananta found himself inside a vast, empty place and was shocked to be there, considering that he had been fighting Behiron. He looked around, wondering where he was and how he had ended up there. He had an uneasy feeling about the place and knew he had to hurry and find a way out as soon as possible, but he was uncertain about where to go. Suddenly, someone spoke to him from behind, urging him to remember. Ananta was startled and quickly turned to see Azidahaka, who reminded him of the person who had taken everything from him. Ananta was about to ask who that person was, but then he realized it was Azidahaka. Azzy called him a cursed mortal and told him to unleash his inner rage and cry endlessly. Meanwhile, outside, Azzy, who had taken over Ananta's body, raised its claws and attacked Behiron. Behiron evaded the attack and leaped away to create some distance between them. Behiron questioned if Ananta had lost consciousness and gone berserk, but Azzy responded with an angry growl. Behiron clenched his fist in frustration and positioned himself, remarking that it was an unsightly sight. Azzy gathered flames in its mouth and launched a fiery attack at Behiron, but Behiron extended his shining fist, blocking Azzy's flames with a bright, powerful light, resulting in a loud explosion. Juho blocked the attack, which was spreading everywhere, with his wings and told Bernhard that, despite not knowing if he would turn into embers of fire, his pose was unshakable. Even though he considered Bernhard an enemy, he couldn't help but acknowledge his prowess. Bernhard leaped toward Juho, realizing he couldn't afford to wait for everyone to regroup and intended to kill Juho on the spot. He swung his axe backward to gather force and screamed, but before he could launch the attack, something sharp sliced through his body, and blood spilled from his wound, surprising him and causing him to release his axe. Juho calmly told Bernhard to sink, and as Bernhard slowly transformed into a beast, a light pierced through his chest, and he fell to the ground. Juho simply pointed at him, and then he turned his attention to Nadia, noting her fear-stricken appearance, a significant departure from her previous demeanor. She recalled that it was true because she had met that man before. Juho told Nadia that the resonance of the branch served as proof that she was also a chosen vessel. She asked him what he meant by branch, and he walked away, explaining that the branch was a miraculous creation that lowered the barriers of incarnation and granted transcendental powers. It was his desire that would shape the world's future. Meanwhile, Baltzak's monstrous form was continuously struck by thunder, and the thunder grew stronger. As the thunder eventually subsided, a white-haired child appeared before Juho. Juho told Nadia that his brother, created from countless lives, was still confined in a bird's cage. He inquired about the child's name, and the child replied with a smile that his name was Ziz. On the other hand, Bahiron leaped into the air to position himself above Azzy. He launched his fist at Azzy while Azzy extended his massive claws toward Bahiron. Their simultaneous attacks created a brilliant burst of light, pushing Bahiron back forcefully. Azzy let out an enraged scream, generating a powerful wind. But Bahiron remained unfazed. Azzy spread his wings and soared through the shattered ceiling, facing the temple from above. Ziz looked at Azzy with anger, but Juho reassured Ziz not to fear. Azzy gathered flames from the outside, forming the fiery jade of the heavens. He hurled it toward the temple, but Juho raised his hand, asking Azzy who he was to dare look down upon him. Juho concentrated his power in his hand, declaring that there was no place for Azzy in the heavens, and unleashed a mighty burst of energy into the flames, commanding, "Let there be light." The light consumed the flames Azzy had created and flew directly at him, resulting in a brilliant explosion that also struck the tree. Ruby, who watched from a distance, attempted to move but was held tightly by Whitefoot. Whitefoot reported that it was the conclusion of the situation, and after the battle at the White Lotus Tree, thanks to the power of the wing, they had confirmed the end of the White Lotus Tree in their trump card. The incarnation of revenge had been defeated. In the past, in the desert, animals were chasing after something, and that something was Ruby. The two animals closed in on Ruby, with one of them almost biting her. However, an axe flew through the air and struck one of the animals in the head. Ananta told Ruby to move back and hurled his other axe at the second animal, causing blood to splatter everywhere. When the animals saw one of their comrades collapse on the ground, they backed away. Young Ananta screamed loudly at them, surprising the animals and causing them to run off. Ananta sighed proudly, and behind him, Ruby looked at him in amazement. A moment later, he sat down behind a large stone. But Ruby crawled closer to him, prompting him to ask why it kept following him and jokingly remarking that there wasn't any part of him to eat. He playfully swung his hand while calling Ruby a little troublemaker and asked why it didn't go away. However, Ruby gathered a flame in its mouth and unexpectedly attacked him with it, causing him to be taken by surprise. Luckily, he managed to dodge it just in time. Ananta was about to say something to Ruby, but he heard a sound behind him and, when he looked back, he was stunned to see a huge rhino in front of him. They stared at each other for a while, but then the rhino charged at him, so he ran speedily with the lizard on his head. After running for a while, he ended up on a cliff and jumped down in a panic. Fortunately, he landed safely and noticed a person sitting in front of a small tree. He looked back, realizing that the rhino was still on the cliff, glaring at him in anger, making him suspect it would keep trying. He gently placed the lizard on the ground and swung his axe forward, challenging the rhino to bring it on, as he would show it the true power of the descendant of the Black Dragon. Suddenly, he saw the person appear behind him with incredible speed, leaving him shocked. The person slowly removed his robe, revealing Juho's face. The rhino glanced at Juho, who stared back at it with his piercing blue eyes, causing the rhino to turn and walk away in fear. Ananta looked back to see Juho, and Juho asked him if he was alright. Meeting Juho that day changed his life completely. A moment later, they arrived at the village. Then a man asked him where he had been going around like that and who was the one next to him. When he was about to explain, but then someone shouted his name loudly, making him jump a little in shock. The lady asked him where he had gone and why he came back so late. Then he winces as she pinches his cheek, while asking him if he goes to the territory of the mystical creature alone again, and what he is going to do if something bad happens. Also, where did he bring that strange animal? He panickedly replied that the animal just followed him on its own. The lady asks him who was the person next to him, and he tells Juho that it is her sister, Ashita. Suddenly, Ashita covered her mouth because she coughed, and when she looked at her hand, she was surprised to see blood. He worriedly asked her if she was alright and told her not to overdo it, and that they should go inside. Then they walked away while Juho was looking at them. A moment later, in the tribe leader's house, the leader offered food to Juho and told him to make his stay comfortable. The leader also told Juho that it was rare to welcome an outsider, and he couldn't treat a benefactor who helped a member of his tribe poorly, so he should take as much rest as he wanted. Juho thanked the chief for the hospitality. Then Juho looked at the lizard with his blue shining eye, and the lizard hides behind Ananta in fear. The chief told Juho that while he was staying, Ananta would help as his guide, making Ananta ask why him. The man hit Ananta's head while telling him that he was being rude to the chief. Then the chief asked Juho why he came to such a remote wilderness and told him that their land had rugged terrain, making it not a good place to embark on a journey. Juho told the chief that he was an explorer and he was conducting research on the customs, geography, and incarnation of various regions. The chief asks Juho if he means deities, but Juho just gives the paper he is holding to the chief and tells him to take a look at it. Then Juho opens the map while telling the chief that from the powerful Eastern Empire to the severe northern ice fields, and all the way to the dense western forests, over the years, he has roamed the continent, encountering countless traditions and legends. Also, he has been following the story of the god Manhwa passed down in the Crimson Wilderness. The chief asked Juho what incarnation he was looking for, and he replied that he was looking for Azidahaka, the first being to be endowed with divine power. 6 incarnations, an entity that has received both fear and worship, a demon's incarnation, and it was the black dragon named Azidahaka. Days later, they were cooking soup in a pot, and Juho explained to Ishida that it was a medicinal herb with extraordinary properties. It also had the effect of boosting the body's immune system, which could be helpful for strengthening one's overall health. Ishida thanked Juho and told him that she felt better. Juho told her that he had to go now and that she shouldn't overexert herself and should take a rest. Ananta asked Juho where he was planning to go today, and Juho replied that he was heading down to investigate the estuary. He asked Juho if they should catch some fish today and told his sister that he would help Juho today again, and then be back. Ishida called his name to tell him to be careful and to come back safely, to which he happily replied, "Okay, I will be back." Then he walked away with Juho, but he noticed the people in his tribe looking at him sadly, making him worried and confused. A moment later, in the river, he told Juho that he had been staying in the village for a whole week and asked if there was any progress with his investigation, or whatever it was. Juho replied that there was no such thing as a guaranteed harvest, and at best, it was nothing more than fragmented histories of the descendants of the Black Dragon. Then Juho told him that in the past, the ancestors of the boy who endured the suffering of foreign invasions with the help of the Black Dragon were able to repel the invaders and were descendants of warriors who revered the Black Dragon, the tribe's benefactor. But that was all he knew about the descendants of the Black Dragon that he had learned. However, all the villagers completely ignored any talk about the Black Dragon, as if they were hiding something. He asked Juho if he wasn't thinking too much, but Juho just asked him back if he was still hunting secretly without his sister's knowledge these days. He replied that he had been acting like it was nothing, but recently, the wounds had been increasing noticeably, and he was afraid his sister would find out soon. He begged Juho to keep it a secret from his sister because he didn't want to cause her unnecessary worry. He told Juho that winter comes quickly in the wilderness, so they needed to hunt as much as possible while there was still prey left. Juho asked him where his parents were, and he replied that both of them passed away when he was a baby due to an illness, which was why his sister was overprotective of him. He asked Juho if he still thought of him as a child and told him to focus on his own business and not get distracted by taking care of his little sibling. It was the reason why he had to prepare many gifts for him as a token of his apology. Juho asked him if it wasn't painful, and he smiled and replied that it was not painful at all because it was for his one and only family. Then he told Juho that they should stop the heavy conversation there and asked Juho why he was investigating the first incarnation. Juho replied that he was looking for the god's treasure. He asked him, "What is the god's treasure?" And Juho replied that it was the source of the power of the gods possessed by the 6 incarnations, a power that transcends the laws of the world and human understanding. The 6 revelations contain the power and authority of the gods, and if someone can obtain all of it, that person will surely become a being who can transcend the boundaries of this world. He asked Juho if that old scale was the one that had made Juho surprised and asked, "What do you mean by old scale?" Juho then asked him if he knew something, and he scratched his head in panic, telling Juho that it was a secret from the others. He shared a story he had heard from his sister when he was young, which said that the Black Dragon, consumed by rage, didn't stop at defeating the invaders but continued until it turned the Red Wilderness into ashes. The Black Dragon entrusted one of its scales to the ancestors to restrain itself, and after separating the source of its power, it fell into a deep slumber. The ancestors built a temple known as the Dragon's Gorge to worship the Black Dragon and ordered the village's elite warriors to protect the place and the Black Dragon's scales from evildoers. Juho was about to say something, but he apologized to him, explaining that even for him, it was difficult beyond that point, making Juho silent. He stood up and told Juho that since the village chief had allowed him to stay in the village as long as he'd like, he'd personally guide him anywhere but there. Juho told him that if that was the case, he had a place he'd like to request. A moment later, they arrived somewhere hot, and the lizard was crawling in exhaustion. Ananta grabbed it and placed it on his shoulder, telling Juho that now that he was there, he should cheer up. But he was confused to see a bright light in front of him. Juho told him that he had a dream of seeking the horizon that bridges the realms of the gods, and he would never stop his journey, even if it meant turning everyone in that world into an enemy, until that dream came true. He asked Juho what that was supposed to mean, and Juho just asked him if he had never once doubted. Then he told him that, in reality, it was because of the curse of the black dragon, which made him surprised. He stepped back in shock, but Juho just asked him how much he knew about the black dragon and told him that Azidahaka was the servant of the demon god who governs curses and death, an incarnation serving such an evil deity for no apparent reason, and he asked if it wasn't out of the question to entrust the god's treasure to a mere tribe. Juho also told him that the black dragon used them all to pass on the curse of the demon lord held by God's will. Even his parents falling ill was because of it, and it was also why his only sister suffered from such illness for so long. It was all because of that black dragon's curse. Later, in the village, Ashita woke up and noticed that Ananta was still not home. She worriedly came out of their house and wondered where he was wandering around at that hour. She looked up at the blue sky, hoping that Ananta would not catch a cold. Meanwhile, in the sacred temple underground, two huge men were firmly guarding it. Then, one of the men noticed someone and shouted, asking who was there. The man told Juho to stop and said that people without permission could not enter that place. However, Juho continued walking, so the man attacked him with a spear. Juho just grabbed the spear's tip with his bare hand, shocking the man. He then kicked the man in the back, causing him to slam onto the ground hard, while the other man was stunned. Juho then punched the other man, making him collapse. Juho told Ananta that it was okay to come out now, and Ananta emerged from hiding while holding a shining flower. Ananta looked at the collapsed men, realizing that Juho was strong because, in an instant, the tribe's elites were down. Juho smiled and told him that they should hurry and he'd wrap it all up before dawn. Then they entered the temple, and Juho made the elite guards that were on their way collapse in an instant. Later, they reached the center of the temple, and Juho told him that they had arrived. Suddenly, the flower in Ananta's hand moved, startling him. He asked Juho what it was, but Juho just laughed and walked closer to the chest in the center, leaving Ananta confused. Juho assured him that there was no need to be afraid because everything was going according to his plan. Then Juho opened the chest lid, and a bright light emanated from it. Ananta walked closer to look at it, and Juho told him that it was the final piece. It was the only scale arranged in reverse, and he could see that it was his weakness. Juho expressed his gratitude for Ananta's dedication and said that it was all thanks to him. He worriedly called Juho and asked if, by doing what he said, his sister's illness could really be cured and if he could truly count on it. Juho put his hand on his shoulder and asked him how could a human being be so foolish, making him look up at Juho in horror. Juho eerily told him that it was time to pay the price for his choices. Juho then grabbed his hands tightly and forcefully pulled him closer to the scale. Ananta shouted, asking Juho what he was doing, but Juho just stuck the shining flower on the scale, and the powerful light consumed Ananta's hands. A powerful light emanated from underground toward the sky. Ashita saw it from the village and was surprised, recognizing it as the Dragon's Canyon. Suddenly, the ground shook uncontrollably, and beneath the ground where the black dragon was sleeping, as he woke up, stood up, and felt the ground shake. It immediately opened its wings and flew out of the broken ground. Villagers felt the shaking ground and came out of their houses, wondering what was happening and if there was an earthquake. Then a man noticed something in the sky and pointed at it, telling everyone to look at it. They saw the black dragon heading toward the light, wondering who dared to desire the power of the gods. Meanwhile, in the temple, Ruby was crying and trying to wake Ananta up, while Ananta lay on the ground without hands. He regained consciousness when he heard Ruby and looked up to see Juho standing in front of the light. Juho reached for the flower, shouting that he had finally gotten his hands on it. Then Juho grabbed the flower and told it to come, thinking about the miracle that would continue the possibilities in the world. He took the flower out of the light, and his body underwent a transformation. He then lifted the flower to grab its sharp end and stabbed it into himself. The flower began to enter his body, and a powerful power spread inside him, causing him to shout in pain. A moment later, the spreading was done, and Juho was standing. Suddenly, as he swiftly descended in front of Juho and asked if he knew what it meant, touching the dragon's weakness. As he introduced himself as Azidahaka and ordered Juho to give him his name. Juho released a powerful power, showed his wings, and told Azi that his name was Juho, the incarnation of wings. On the other hand, Ananta was still on the ground, looking up in wonder, but he was surprised to see the incarnation of the wings and the black dragon facing each other. Azi told Juho that he could feel the treasures of the gods in his body, and he couldn't believe it because he knew it was impossible impossible to withstand them with the normal body of an incarnation. As he furiously called Juho a bastard and asked what he had done with the original owners of those treasures. Juho told Azzy that he had asked the obvious and that he had killed them all and taken the treasures. Then Juho attacked Azzy with his power balls, causing a loud explosion. But when the smoke slowly disappeared, it showed Azzy without any injury. Juho told Azzy that since he had separated the god's treasure from his body, he could see that he had significantly lost energy. Then Juho called him a ghost of the age of gods and said that he would personally sink him, but Azzy just challenged Juho to try if he even had the powers to. Azzy released a powerful fire from its mouth to attack Juho, but Juho flew away at high speed to avoid it. Azzy opened its wings and flew up to follow Juho in midair. When he was closer to Juho, he released a multitude of fireballs into his surroundings and released them all at once toward Juho. However, Juho created a huge bright ball and said, "Let there be light." Juho's light shattered Azzy's fireballs into dust, leaving Azzy angry. Then Azzy swung its wings open, releasing sharp blades, and swung them toward Juho to attack. Juho simply looked at it, opened his wings, and released sharp feathers in response. Juho's feathers cut through Azzy's sharp blades and flew straight at Azzy. The feathers hit Azzy, creating a crystal light in the sky that transformed into a powerful ball of energy, continuously increasing in intensity. This left the people in the village shocked, and Ashita worried about Ananta. On the other hand, Ananta forced himself to sit up even though his hands were gone. He gazed at the sky with worry, his thoughts consumed by his sister. Meanwhile, Azzy fell to the ground hard, and Azzy's body was severely injured. Juho looked at Azzy and declared that the heart had been ripped out, making it his loss. Juho laughed and turned his gaze toward the sky, stating that finally, he would reach the heavens. He swiftly ascended into the sky, leaving Ananta crying, wondering how it could end this way when he had done everything for the sake of his sister. Suddenly, Azzy, now behind him, called him a descendant of the Black Dragon and questioned whether this was how he had assisted that so-called incarnation of wings. Ananta cried and begged Azzy for forgiveness, explaining that he had acted solely for the sake of his older sister. Azzy expressed no forgiveness, deeming it a pity that an evil god displayed such emotions before death, and cursed Ananta. Azzy's body slowly evaporated, but a red soul emerged from the body, and Azzy's soul came out, screaming. The souls flew up, with Ananta realizing their direction was the village. Azzy arrived at the village and set it ablaze with his flames. People screamed in agony, and Ananta's sister was burned alive. Azzy unleashed a relentless torrent of fire until everything and everyone had turned to ash. Ananta cried out and called for his sister, but Azzy's soul opened its mouth and devoured him. He entered the soul of Azzy, and it coursed through his veins, his heart, and his entire body, causing him to scream in anguish. Azzy called him a foolish mortal and foretold that he would forever be ensnared by death and the muddiness of disasters. He transformed into a beast and let out a loud, animalistic scream. Years later, in the dark prison, Ananta remained trapped in chains around his neck, hands, and feet, his eyes devoid of any emotion. In the present, the white lotus tree collapsed, and Juho told Ziz that it was an unintended long journey, so they should return to their sanctuary. Bihiron punched the tree as if it were glass, creating a portal. However, Nadia called out and mentioned Ananta's name, causing Juho to stop. She told him that they said he was a vile creature who deluded himself into thinking he was a god and that the child before them was undoubtedly a true incarnation without a doubt. She begged Juho to answer because she had no memories before meeting him, asking him what the child could be like. Juho replied that indeed, it was the boy from back then, and everything arises from the combination of cause and condition. When cause and condition scatter, they disappear, and it was indeed fate. Juho also told her that he looked forward to the day when they'd meet again someday and referred to her as the embodiment of nature. Later, someone sat in a water pod, and another person referred to that person as their majesty to inform them of Lord Bernhard's return from the southern surveillance outpost. Their Majesty stood up, expressing joy at the news, and then called for Myrrh. She was ready to give Myrrh a piece of her mind if the news was bad. Myrrh replied that she'd pass on that and informed her that according to the messenger, there was one incarnation and 2 humans accompanying Bernhard. Their Majesty inquired if they were winged creatures, but the lady assisting her replied that she didn't know and suggested that it was best for her to see and judge for herself. Later, at the gate of the castle, Bernhard entered with a few people next to him. Nadia recognized that veteran Bernhard was similar to Ananta. Bernhard introduced himself as one who bears a grudge against the incarnations of the wings and invited them to the headquarters of the organization to which he belongs. The stated reason was a tournament, but Bernhard's goal was undoubtedly the power that Ananta possesses. After the battle concluded, the Whitefoot concealed Juho's presence from them. Nadia knew that she, too, could have left for anywhere, but at some point, she had set her feet on the northeastern part of the continent to meet a certain individual, and that individual was. Then, the temple door opened, and someone shouted that Bernhard was entering. They saw a red carpet leading to the majestic chair with people on the sides. Another person shouted that Her Majesty the Queen was entering, and Nadia realized that it was the first princess of the warrior nation. Munguk Valkyria, a militant group with a grudge against the incarnation of the wings, Ragelsa Einherjar, the leader of Levantine. Bernhard greeted Ragelsa respectfully, and Ragelsa welcomed his triumphant return. She told him to skip the formalities because she wanted to hear the result of the expedition first. Bernhard replied that as they had initially planned, in order to approach the Temple of Caves, they had cleared out a group participating in the arena and used them as a disguise. However, there were some unexpected variables. Ultimately, they infiltrated the summit of the temple, and there he encountered the incarnation of wings, Juho. Ragelsa asked him what happened next, and he replied that immediately after, he engaged in a battle with Juho, but, to his shame, he was ultimately defeated. Ragelsa asked if he was saying that he returned in disgrace without any significant achievement, and he replied that victory and defeat are part of a warrior's life, even if they lose several times. He then swore that in the end, he would surely take Juho's life with his own hands. Ragelsa smiled and commended Bernhard for becoming a veteran. She asked him about the incarnation beside him. Bernhard apologized to Ragelsa for the delayed introduction and introduced Nadia as the incarnation of nature, part of a group separate from them, pursuing the incarnation of the wings. He also informed Ragelsa that Nadia was a new ally who would lend her strength to Levantine. He expressed his gratitude for the help he received during the expedition and mentioned that he had accompanied Nadia to introduce her to Ragelsa. Ragelsa asked the lady next to her where the rest of the members were, and the lady replied that even though they were referred to as members, they were mostly barbarian men and ordinary young girls. In exchange for care and protection, they had offered their cooperation. The lady also mentioned that the young girl was in relatively good health, so they planned to relocate her to civilian housing soon. As for the barbarian man, he was being monitored at the medical facility, but his condition had worsened, and he was currently in critical condition and unresponsive. The lady offered to bring him along, even if they had to do so forcibly if Ragelsa wished. Ragelsa stood up and addressed the lady, stating that there was no need for it. She then walked closer to Nadia to welcome her, extending her hand and introducing herself as Ragelsa Einherjar. Nadia accepted Ragelsa's hand and expressed her gratitude for the warm welcome. Ragelsa then asked Nadia about her intentions in seeking an alliance with Levantine. She cautioned Nadia that if she were a spy with intentions to infiltrate Levantine, she should think again. Nadia, however, assured Ragelsa that her aim was to make a deal regarding the branch embedded within her and to acquire all the information Levantine possessed about it. Suddenly, someone called out to Ragelsa loudly, and a cat lady furiously informed Ragelsa that there was no need to listen to that person's stories because she couldn't bear it from the moment Nadia had set foot there due to the stench of the incarnation of the wings. The cat lady pointed at Nadia and revealed that she had received the branch of the incarnation of the wings within her body, capturing the attention of everyone. Ragelsa asked Nadia if what the cat lady had said was true. Nadia confirmed the truth of the cat lady's statement, explaining that since encountering Juho, the branch's movements continued to resonate even now. However, regarding the branch embedded within her, she emphasized that she didn't possess any information. Ragelsa asked Bernhard if he had shared any information about the branch with Nadia, and he replied that he hadn't shared any details without her permission. Ragelsa then considered the unique opportunity that Nadia's presence might offer them if she were the one the incarnation of the wings was searching for. Once again, someone called out to Ragelsa, and she expressed her irritation, asking what was causing the disturbance during the royal council. The woman who had spoken apologized fearfully but reported that there was an extremely urgent matter, revealing that a massacre was currently happening in the recent civilian housing area. Well guys, that's the end of the video. If you like this video, comment part 2 in the comments section. Also subscribe to the channel, hit the bell and like the video. Thank you for watching and see you next time again.